Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to start looking at the sampling distribution. Okay. Now, what is a sampling distribution? A sampling distribution is the probability distribution of all possible values of a statistic for a given sample size selected from a population. Okay. Now, the best way to understand sampling distribution, in my opinion, is to look at an example. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay. Let's go back to my favorite example when it comes to probability and statistics, which is I want to find the average height of everyone on Earth. So there are about 7 billion people on Earth. So obviously, that's going to be your population. Right? Now, at this point, it should be clear to you that this is not a feasible problem. Right? In other words, you can't possibly go and measure the heights of 7 billion people and take the average. And so what we will do instead is we will take samples, right? And hopefully we can use these samples to make statements about the population average, okay? So now let's say that I decide on samples of size 30, okay? And let's say I go out and I take the first sample and I take the average of my first sample. It gives, let's call that average x1 bar, okay? And then let's say I go and I take another sample of 30 people. Let's call that sample number 2. And the average of my second sample is x2 bar. Suppose I do the same thing again, so I go out, I randomly select 30 people. Let's call that my sample 3. And the average of this third sample is x3 bar, right? And so on and so on. Right. Now suppose I do this over and over and over again, right? In other words, I'm gonna collect samples of 30 people over and over and over again until I have collected all the possible samples of 30 people from the population. What I'm gonna end up with is I'm gonna have a bunch of sample averages. And these are, x1 bar, x2 bar, x3 bar, etc. Right? Now, what I want to do with these averages is I want to find 3 things. First, I want to find the mean of these sample averages. Okay. Then I want to find the standard deviation of these sample averages, right? And then I can use these numbers to draw a histogram or to construct a histogram. And the histogram is going to be able to tell me how these sample averages are distributed. Okay. Now, these three pieces of information make up what's called the sampling distribution of the mean of size 30. Okay? Okay, so let's walk through this again, right? I want to find the average height of everyone on Earth, the 7 billion people, right? I can't feasibly do that, so I'm going to take samples, and hopefully I'll be able to use samples to say something about the population average, right? Let's say I decide on samples of 30 people, okay? What I'm going to do is I'm going to go out and take all the possible values, all the possible samples of 30 people. And let's say the first sample used me an average of x1 bar. The second sample used me an average of x2 bar. And the third sample used me an average of x3 bar, and so on and so forth. Right? What I'm going to end up with is I'm going to end up with a bunch of sample averages. x1 bar, x2 bar, x3 bar, and so on and so forth. From these averages, right, I'm going to be finding the mean of those averages, the standard deviation of those averages, and then with those numbers, with those sample averages, I'm going to be drawing a histogram, which in turn tells me the distribution of the sample averages. Okay? Now those pieces of information, the mean, the standard deviation, and the distribution, make up what's called the sampling distribution of the mean. Okay? So now in this class, what we're going to do is we're going to be interested in the sampling distribution of the mean. And then we want to learn about the sampling distribution of the proportion.